Good morning, students. In our last lecture on Robert Burns, it was Burns's the poem named A Bird's Epitaph. We have discussed about Burns's the technical features of Burns's writing, the patterns of writing that we can attach with the typical, the transitional poets. That means the pre-romantics, and how so far the basic features of pre-romanticism and the basic features of romantic tendencies can be found in Burns's writing. In my last lecture, I have discussed about the typical representations of, it is the national identification, the representation of some autobiographical implications, and there are some political implications altogether present in Burns's poems. And as I have mentioned that so far as the Scottish War of Independence, so far as the typical patriotic representation, so far as the basic differences between English and the Scottish temperaments are concerned, we have to read the second poem that is our assignment in this particular segment. Uh, the name of the poem is Scots Were Here. You will find, so far as the title of this poem is concerned, you will find somehow that the name Scots Were Here, the name like where and hair, these terms are not to be considered as English anymore, right? You will find that these are the terms that are taken from Scottish linguistics or Scottish language to be specific. Why this name or why this particular title is to be attached to this particular poem? It is probably because it is the editor's choice, you see, because the Scots were here. These words are taken from the first line of this particular poem. Rather, we have to consider that the actual name can be uh, Robert Bruce's address to his troops at Bannockburn. Yes, that was the particular name that is attached with this particular poem. But apart from that, we have to say that the title that is being ascribed to this particular poem, it is deliberately taken from the first line, because the first line interprets or the first line indicates squats hair with wireless plate. So therefore, generally we find typically, that whenever we find that there is no particular name is attached with the poem, generally the editors, they took they take generally the first line of the poem, and the poem is named according to them. You have remembered the names of Shakespearean sonnets, you see, because the Shakespearean sonnets are named according to the first line of this poem. So similarly, this particular thing is here. To begin this poem, first of all, let us consider the basic topics, the basic important uh, sections that we have to concentrate on. The first topic is generally the consider this particular poem, that is Scots Were Here, as a patriotic poem. Okay, that means you have to refer to the Scottish War of Independence and how this is associated with this particular poem. Or rather, we can consider Scots Were Here as representing the struggle for freedom, right? The second important thing you see that you have to concentrate on the significance of the title, or what the title or the first lines of this particular poem is actually indicating. Rather, you have to concentrate, uh, consider this particular poem as a history poem. That means how so far it is carrying the basic implications of Scottish history, that is the Scottish War of Independence, as I mentioned just now, and how so far these have been reciprocated in the form of the poetry. Clear? So to begin this particular poem, as I mentioned that the Scots Were Here, this particular title has been taken from the first line of this poem. The alternative title of this poem is Robert Bruce's address to his troops at Bannockburn. Now, what is Bannockburn? You see that this particular song, this poem is considered to be a song. This particular song draws on Scotland's heroic past, as I mentioned just now. It was written in the form of a rallying, when the rally was going on with the troops of the soldiers. The rallying war cry given by Robert the Bruce. Probably you have heard of the name Robert Bruce. Uh, a rallying war cry given by Robert the Bruce to his soldiers before the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, that is 1314, which was one of the important victories of the Scottish War of Independence. You know, there was a continuous form of a battle that was going on regarding the independence of the Scotland. And among the different kinds of war efforts, you see that this one, that is the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, it was one of the most important one. In a postscript of the letter, he sends his publisher, Burns writes about Bruce's victory as a quote unquote glorious struggle for freedom associated with the glowing ideas of some other struggles of the same nature, not quite so ancient. So you will find here that Burns, when he is writing this particular poem, he is deliberately choosing the lines that might have been performed by the Scottish people during the war. Okay, and he is using those words to commemorate their feeling, their temperament, their position, and also to relocate them in terms of French Revolution. I will come to this later because at the end of this poem, you will find there are the triple exclamation marks that is considered as tennis court oath. You see, that is being related or relocating this particular line, do or die, or these kinds of things, to the typical French revolutionaries. So that's why it says this is the song's vernacular Scots version that we are reading at this moment. The Scottish dialect is central to the political aim of the poem. I have already referred to that particular linguistic differentiation between Scottish and English while I was discussing about a bird's epitaph. That is, our last lecture. The Scottish dialect is central to the political aim of the poem. However, the English version was later radically denounced, okay, or reworked. The second thing that is important, as I mentioned, that it is the Robert Bruce's address to his troops at Bannockburn, and this particular poem was set to the tune of Hey Tooty Tatty. What is Hey Tooty Tatty? Tooty Tatty is a Scottish traditional tune famed to have been played by Robert Bruce's soldiers. And here you will find that Burns, that is Robert Burns, he is deliberately choosing that particular, linguistic and metrical arrangements regarding tutti tatti, and he is imposing them in this particular poem regarding its choosing of words, regarding its structure of the poem, the metrical arrangements, and so okay, and these are continuously being incorporation. So for example, when you take the first stanza, you will find that from the technical perspective, that is the metrical arrangement, you will find that the structure is A, B. So that is the fundamental structure of tutti tatti. So that is the rhyme scheme. You see that the first three lines, they are rhyming, and the fourth line is obviously referring to something much more powerful and rather much more different from the first three lines. And these are being ascribed, as it says, Scots who have or were have with Wallace blade. So from the first line, you will find the same words, the same kind of phrases being incorporated. Scots who are here with Wallace blade, Scots whom Bruce has often laid. Welcome to your gory bed or to victory. So at the very beginning, you will find what are the terms are actually signifying. Let us introduce them. Here, where, WHA, this particular term is actually referring to who? WHO. Whereas HAE, this particular term is referring to have. HAVE. And again, the term like WI and the apostrophe, it is actually referring to with. WITH. So what it indicates, therefore, Scots, it is the addressing, as I've mentioned, addressing to the soldiers of Robert Bruce. and suppose it is Robert Bruce's address, so therefore it is spoken by Robert Bruce, okay, to his troops. And he says, Scots, that means the soldiers, who have with Wallace blade. Now the question is, who is this Wallace? You will find that his name is Sir William Wallace, okay? He took birth in 1270 and he died in 1305. So Sir William Wallace was one of the key leaders of the wars of Scottish independence. He was appointed the guardian of Scotland after defeating the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. That is very important so far as the Scottish history of independence is concerned. You will find that here it is being mentioned that you are the Scots, you are the soldiers who have with Wallace, that is William Wallace, Sir William Wallace, blade, that means shed your blood. Scots, whom WHAM, it is actually referring to whom? Scots, whom Bruce has often led. So here Bruce is referring to Robert Bruce, you know. And who is Robert Bruce? Robert Bruce was one of the most iconic warriors of the Scottish War of Independence. He led the country to independence against England. He continues to be celebrated as a national hero in Scotland. So therefore, at the very beginning, two lines, you will find that two particular nationalists have been incorporated. Two particular nationalists have been named. The first one is Sir William Wallace and the second one is Robert Bruce. So Burns is to some extent commemorating. To some extent he is referring to Wallace. To some extent he is referring to Robert Bruce. And from his version, he is writing this particular poem. So Scots who have with Wallace played. Scots whom Bruce has often led. Welcome to your gory bed. You see, here gory, this particular term is relating to blood or bloody. That means blood-stained bed. So you can identify that here only you can get victory against your blood, you see. That means if you shed your blood like water and ultimately you are fighting for your independence, only then you can get your victory. So here it says, Scots who have with Wallace blade, Scots whom Bruce has often led, welcome to your gory bed because you have to shed your blood or to victory. That means either you will die or you will get victory. That means without your efforts, without your shedding blood, without your active participation, it cannot be possible that Scotland will win and ultimately become victorious. Then it says, you know, it's a kind of an, as I'm saying it already, there's a nationalistic zeal that has been working within this particular poem. So ultimately, through the lines, through the episodes, through the incorporations of some verbal imagery, the primary focus of this particular poem is to enlarge the typical nationalistic zeal within the characters in front. That means the troops, okay, or the soldiers who are in front. So such a kind of a power that is lurking within the words and the phrases and the phraseologies that have been incorporated here. Here he says, now is the day, now is the hour. See the front of battle lower. Here lower, L-O-U-R, it is actually referring to lower, that is L-O-W-E-R. But it indicates that is drawing closer or that is strengthening. That means it says now is the day. So today is the day. Now is the hour. That is the time, exact time. See the front of battle lower. That is the front of battle is gradually approaching towards you. The front of battle is threatening you. It is coming closer to you. So that is the very moment, or it is the very moment when you have to show your courage, when you have to show your enterprises, when you have to show your power, or you have to show your zeal, revolutionary zeal that is being needed within you. The nationalistic agenda is always working. So now is the day, now is the hour. See the front of battle lower. See approach proud Edward's power. So you will find it is the antagonism that has been pointed out. Here Edward is actually referring to Edward II. You know, probably you have heard of the name Edward II, who actually took birth in 1284 and he died in 1387. He's considered as Edward II of England. Probably you have heard of this particular name while reading Dr. Foster's, because there was a particular reference, and not only reference, but from history we'll find that Edward II was a famous name that was written by Christopher Marlowe. It was a play. So now is the day, and Edward II was the antagonist or the opponent of Robert Bruce at the time. So it says that now is the day, that the now is the hour. See the front of battle lower that's threatening, it's coming towards you. See, approach proud Edward's power. So proud Edward is gradually moving towards you. He is showing your power, and along with the power, if you be not successful in this particular battle, ultimately you will face chains and slavery. So do you want chain and slavery, or you have to put your optimum, you see, the optimum efforts are needed to get your freedom, to get your victory ultimately. So here it says, now is the day, now is the hour, see the front of battle lower, see approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery. And then it says, what will be traitor name? So this is a question ultimately. This particular question is being made against the troops of the Scottish soldiers. Who will be a traitor knave? Who can fill a coward's grave? Who say base as to be slave? So these are the questions you see. And from the figure of speech, you will find that these are considered to be the interrogations. It's not the typical parts of speech interrogation. It is called the figure of speech interrogation. Because everywhere you will find that along with the questions, there are the answers are mentally supplied to it. Here it says, who will be a traitor knave? So do you want to be a traitor? Do you want to be a knave? You're a foolish man. No. Who can fill a coward's grave? Do you want to die cowardly? And do you want to face your grave without any power, without any authority, and without any courage to show? So who will betray the knave? Who will fill a coward's grave? Who say base as be a slave? So do you want to be a slave? No? So everywhere, the three questions, that have been put in a line. Ultimately, you will find that from each and every section, you will find the answer is no. That means somehow these are the words that are indicating a kind of persuading the soldiers to fight against Edward or against Edward, right? So here it says, who will betray a knave? Who can feel a coward's grave? Who say base to be a slave? Let him turn and fly. That means the person who wants to be a traitor or knave, the person who wants a coward's grave, the person who wants to be a slave, let him turn and fly. That means it is on the best, it is at the beginning of the fight, of the battle. And here he is addressing to his soldiers that if you have some, a kind of a cowardice within you, then ultimately you can turn and fly from hence, right? Fly from here, because there is no need of including you in our troop, because this particular troop has to be made by the soldiers who has courage, the soldiers who have courage, who have the wisdom, who have the authority in them, and obviously the nationalistic zeal to get victory. So the soldiers who will be a traitor knave, the soldiers who can feel a coward's grave, the soldiers who say base as be a slave, let him turn and fly. Who for Scotland's king and law freedom showed will strongly daw. Free men stand or free men fall, let him follow me. So these two stanzas are in antithesis, you see. These two stanzas are antithetical in its temperament. In the previous stanza, that is stanza number 3, probably. Yes, it is stanza number 3. There is a reference to the persons who can fly and who can turn, who must not be engaged in such kind of a fight. And in stanza number 4, you will find that these are the qualities that must have to be present within the soldiers. Okay? And the persons who, for Scotland's king and law, that means who are following law and who are just giving their lives for the betterment of this country, who are just giving their lives for the king. Here it says, who for Scotland's king and law. Freedom's sword will strongly draw. So it is not the sword only, rather it is freedom sword, because the sword and the fight will bring freedom to Scotland. So that's why it is called the freedom's sword. So who for Scotland's king and law, freedom's sword will strongly draw. Free men stand and for free men fall. It might be possible that you may stand or you may fall. But ultimately, there is a thing, you see, and it is in capitalized form. It is in the uppercase letters. It's free man. So the terms that are important here, you will find that each and every term has been in uppercase. Okay, these have been used in uppercase. That is why Scotland is important. Scotland is in uppercase. Free man is important. That is, free man is in uppercase, because liberty is the ultimate focus that you are to foreseen. So who for Scotland's king and law freedom showed will strongly draw. Freemen stand or freemen fall. Let him follow me. So these are the qualities that have to be present within these soldiers to take part in Robert Bruce's army, to take part in the battle that is going on in the Bannockburn. So here it says, who for Scotland's king and law freedom showed will strongly draw. Freemen stand or freemen fall. Let him follow me. By oppression's pains, woes and pains, by your sons in servile chains, we will drain our dearest veins, but they shall be free. So ultimately, to free our uh, future generation, to free our sons from the servile chains of English power, you see, the woes and pains that have been associated with the kind of a slavery that have been associated with the English power. That means if Edward comes and if Edward wins, it must introduce a kind of slavery to the Scottish. Okay, and the particular kind of a problem and tussle, the particular kind of woes and pains that they are facing at this moment. Okay, so these are associated with the oppression that has been going on. Okay, the oppressed are the Scottish people, and the oppressors are the English people. So there is a particular kind of a difference is there. So by oppressions, woes and pains, by your sons in servile chains, here chain is referring to slavery. So we will drain our dearest veins. Ultimately, again the bloodshed, the reference is being there. That is, draining the veins is referring to the bloodshed. That means we have to shed our blood, okay, so that they shall be free. Here, the future generations is being associated. Here you see that an 1862, I mentioned here that an 1862 version, that is manuscript version of the song, sold in London, contains this early version of the penultimate stanza. It's the penultimate stanza. Here you will find that at the earlier version or the manuscript version, we find that this stanza was written in a different way. It was written, do you hear, I'm reading from that, do you hear your children cry? Were we born in chains to lie? So can you not hear your children? They're crying. Were we born in chains to lie? That means our birth is not for to be in chains. No. Come death or liberty. Yes, they shall be free. That means the children shall be free. So you can find the same thing is being there. Okay, the same temperament is being incorporated in this particular stanza. These were changed by Robert Burns, obviously. And in the last stanza, it is very important here, it says, lay the proud usurpers low. Usurper, the particular term is referring to the kings, okay, who are usurping their position, who are usurping their throne. Okay, it is not in that sense, very sense, you see that Macbeth has been considered as a usurper. So lay the proud usurper low. Here Edward is being considered as the usurper. Here the kings of England have been considered as usurper. So lay the proud usurpers low. That means you have to make them down. You have to make them, fall. Tyrants fall in every foe. So on each and every kind of animosity, we have to make them fall. You see? Again, the term, the capitalized term, liberty is in every blow. That means you are carrying your sword, you are carrying your lances with you, and you have to keep it in mind that in your every blow there lies liberty. That means each and every blow is important. Can you not find that such an powerful kind of speech is being incorporated to a leader? You see that somehow whenever you will find that at the beginning of a war, at the beginning of a battle, at the beginning of a kind of a very serious event, you see that there is some need of such kind of wording, such kind of, you see, the words are kind of, say, important lectures that are needed just to motivate their soldiers, to motivate their people. Okay, so that this particular kind of motivation lead them with the war cry. Obviously, probably you have watched multiple or a number of films where just before the battle, okay, there is the leader. It might be the king, it might be the general, or maybe any other person who is delivering. We are seeing them, we are watching them regularly, that they are giving a kind of a lecture just before the onset of this particular war, and and the war cry is being heard throughout the troops, you see. So lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberty is in every blow, let us do or die. So this do or die, and then triple exclamation marks, you see. So it is somehow very interesting. The triple exclamation, you see that the last line of the song is a triple exclamatory. And as I've already mentioned, that the triple exclamatory, this particular thing is to be related with the tennis court oath, okay, of the French revolutionaries. So Burns had the knowledge of this. So it is not, it's a kind of uh, it is just accidentally Burns is putting these three exclamations side by side. Rather, Burns had the foreknowledge of this tennis court oath that had been related with the French revolutionaries, and he's deliberately choosing these words. He's deliberately choosing these punctuations so as to relate this particular poem with the contemporary situations, you see, that when Burns was living at this moment. This allusion to the contemporary French struggles relocates the poem to the present times, otherwise situated in the glorious history of Robert Bruce's world. Okay, literally, you will find that somehow this particular poem is related to Robert Bruce's War of Independence, that is Scottish War of Independence, as I've already mentioned. But ultimately, you will find that somehow there are some references like this one, the last line and the triple exclamations and the word do or die, you see. So these are the wordings that Burns is using to link this particular poem, link this particular word, link this particular reference to the French Revolution, obviously. Somehow you will find that so complete and deplorable was his delusion that he thought he was doing honor to the ancient heroes of his native land when he confounded them with the slaves of Robespierre, whom he thought the heroes of liberty. The song, actually, this particular song, that is Scots, this particular song was repeated in Thomson's 1803 collection. Who is Thomson? Thomson, as you know, that Thomson is to be considered as one among the pre-romantics. Yes, he's one among the precursors of romanticism. This particular song reappeared in Thomson's 1803 collection. With Burns' date, Thomson had no compunction in impertinently perverting its political meaning into an anti-France song in a manner symptomatic of the whole 19th century tendency in domesticating the poet to the Anglo-Scottish tribal poetics. That means what the poem was initially related to the typical Anglo-Scottish tribal perspectives, okay? But Thomson is changing some words, okay? And by placing or newly placing the words, he is referring to the contemporary situation. I'm referring to that. So by changing hua into who, ha into have, often in often, and say into so, the following song will be English. And by substituting Gallia, the Gallia was in the earlier Scottish version for Edward, and Britain For Scotland, it will be adapted to the present time. So Edward was changed into Gallia. Scotland or Britain was changed into for Scotland, and it is referring to the present time. So it becomes a kind of a tussle between English and France, or England and France. Earlier it was Scottish versus England, and now it has become English versus France, the French army. One could hardly think of a more direct link between linguistic and political emasculation. So somehow, ultimately, you will find that so far as this particular poem is concerned, we will find there is a particular political representation. It is better for you to go through this, the history part of Scottish War of Independence, what happened to Robert Bruce, the reference to Bannockburn, the reference to Wallace and Robert Bruce, and the Edward, King Edward, that is Edward II. I think this will help you to identify the Scottish history or War of Independence, history of the War of Independence, and how you can relate this particular thing or this particular history to this poem. Ultimately, probably you have to know something about the form of tutti tatti. In that form, this particular poem is written. So, as I mentioned earlier, that primarily we have to consider that it is a patriotic poem, and you can identify how or why this poem has to be treated as a patriotic poem, because the typical patriotism, the typical kind of a persuading the soldiers into the war, okay, and the words that are very important regarding the battle that is going on, that can, enlarge the temperament, or that can heighten the effects of the temperaments to the warfare or so, and how the struggle for freedom is being it is being incorporated in this particular poem, and what is the significance of this title, that is Scots Waha, as taken from the first line of this poem. And also it is being referred as the Robert Bruce's address to the troops of Bannockburn, the reference to Bannockburn, and how so far this particular poem has to be considered a history poem, and what is Burns' temperaments, or what are Burns' temperaments to be specific, and how so far he is using such temperaments to this particular poem, and why this particular poem has to be considered as important in the history of Scottish War of Independence, in the history of pre-Romantics writing, or rather Robert Burns' writing, and in as a wonderful piece of literature to be general, and how we can relate this particular temperament with the previous poem that I have discussed in our last lecture, that is A Bird's Epitaph. Okay, so today up to this, go through the poem, go through the text, go through it annotations, and go through the terms and the themes and obviously the topics that I have discussed here, and try to write your answers on it. Thank you.